Hey, Pastor Bill here. Today we got a question from Allison. She said, "Hey, Pastor Bill, could you break down what anointing the home or places in general with oil does spiritually?" That's a great question. I think for most of us, anointing with oil is something that is less familiar. For some of you, it might be depending on the tradition you grew up in, but most of us think about olive oil as being a food item. We cook with it. We might get fancy olive oils with infused flavors that we cook with or dip bread in and use for different purposes. But usually olive oil is used that way for us. Well, biblically, oil had all kinds of significance. It was used to anoint the sick, to tend to wounds, and so we see that in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that the Samaritan that stopped to care for the man who had been beaten up used wine and oil to treat his wounds. The wine more as an antiseptic, and the oil as an ointment to help the wounds heal. Similarly, we might use like an aquaphor or a Vaseline to help wounds heal. So olive oil was used that way. It was also used to anoint honored figures, and there's times when Jesus was anointed with different ointments and perfumes and oils. But it was also a part of the religious and spiritual practices of the ancient Israelites. And so in the Old Testament, anointing with oil had a very prominent place. They did anoint different objects for use in the temple as part of setting those things aside and consecrating them for use in God's house. They anointed spaces. And so the tabernacle was anointed with oil, and Moses oversaw the anointing of the tabernacle as it was consecrated as a place for God's presence among his people. And then it extended to people as well, so that kings were anointed with oil, and we see that with Saul and with David and future kings, that when Samuel came, he anointed them with oil. Priests were anointed. And worshippers could use it for offerings. The lampstands in the temple were fueled with oil. And so oil, and olive oil in particular, was a big part of the spirituality of the Israelites. Now, that still gets to the question about today. Why would we anoint a house or a space with oil? And there is some precedent in the New Testament church for the ongoing use of oil in the same ways as the Old Testament, particularly in James chapter 5. James writes in his letter, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven." And so there in James, he extends some of these Old Testament concepts of anointing with oil to New Testament church. And so I think this is probably the best way for us to think about it. Anointing with oil brings a special significance, and when we as elders have a chance to pray over someone, anointing with oil marks a moment of saying we are trusting the presence of God to consecrate us, to set us aside as his instruments to be holy. We're trusting the presence of God to be able and powerful, to be able to bring healing and wholeness, and the oil is a symbol of God's blessing and presence. If we begin to look at the oil as something magical, and say, okay, we come into a new home, maybe somebody just moved in to a new rental or has just purchased a house, and it's not uncommon for Christians to have a pastor or some spiritual leader come over and anoint different doorways with oil and to pray through the house for God's presence and protection for the family and for a safe space spiritually for people to flourish. And that can be a beautiful, beautiful time. If we are looking at that as a symbol of God's presence, and a way for us to express our confidence and trust in his ability to sovereignly protect us and care for us, and we trust that his Spirit is present with us, then it can be a great way to bring that into a tangible symbol. If we begin to look at anointing with oil more as a magical form, though, of something that is almost like a magic charm to keep the evil spirits away, I think we're misunderstanding the spiritual world and misunderstanding God's presence and falling into some practices that are more about superstition than trust in God. And so so this is why I believe people use oil to anoint those. So Allison, it's a great question. It's something that is there as a symbol for us and has deep roots in the spiritual practices of Israel. It's extended to the church as we're called to continue to anoint those who are sick as a symbol and sign of God's presence. So I hope that helps. If you have a question for me, go ahead and submit it. You can submit it through the website, and I would love to be able to try to do my best to answer. So thanks for writing in, Allison.